Hey everyone, welcome back again. Here we are going through Galatians chapter 3 still. New subheading for today, the Changeless Promise. Let's dive in and take a look at that.
You are watching the Beyond Sunday podcast.
Okay, so here we go. Again, our subheading, the Changeless Promise. Small section to read through today, so let's dive right in. Brethren, I speak in the manner of men, though it is only a man's covenant, yet it is yet if it is confirmed, no one annuls or adds to it. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say, and to seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, who is Christ. And this I say, that the law, which was 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant that was confirmed before by God in Christ, that it should make the promise of no effect. For if the inheritance is of the law, it is no longer of promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. All right, so there we go. That's our section for today. Paul pushing in and re-emphasizing some things he has already opened up in the last couple episodes that we talked about. And so what we're doing is it's time now for Paul to put the right thing first, and he's going to start logicking this out. He's saying, okay, I've kind of given you the basic outline. Let's get into a little bit of nitty gritty and let's sort some things out. First, he reaffirms brotherhood and fellowship. And I think that's really important in kind of a tense talk. I mean, it's one word, but when we started out the chapter, it was foolish. And so he's pausing. He's like, brethren, hey, brothers, settle that tone back down. I don't want to lose you. Don't want you to think I'm being all harsh all the time. And I just want to reaffirm the fellowship that we have. Small note, maybe something silly, but, as I saw that one word start, it's like, that's important. Paul's just a master at relationships and just kind of reaffirms that as he starts this tense talk. But then as he begins, he says, even in worldly matters, we get covenants. Those are things that are happening. We make deals. We make arrangements. We know how to make agreements with one another. We understand what it's like to give our word. And when we look at the word covenant, it's kind of a word we don't really use. We have words like contracts, legal agreements. I've had to go through tons of those, over the course of my life. I'm sure a lot of you guys have as well. It's just, so full of legalese and all these different nuances and everything else. But, a covenant's something different. A covenant, the original word, I'll see if I can say this right. It's diatheke. Diatheke is, the word for covenant. It's a testament. Kind of cool. We're used to the word testament, New and Old Testament. It is a final disposition. It is a last will. Those are some alternative ways that we see that word diatheke being used. But it's kind of interesting because that those other examples, that final disposition, the last will of something, has this kind of finality, this bindingness that says, this is solid. This isn't like a legal agreement where it may go through several drafts or, hey, I'm going to add some amendments or there's addendums to it, kind of those things that we might go through today. Now, this is a final word. A covenant really for the people that Paul was talking to, they had this understanding that a covenant was confirmed, and once it was made, this thing isn't being changed. This is sealed. This is closed. This is the deal as it is. No takesy-backsies. This is it. So he's using language and he's giving them understanding that says, this is grounded. This is solid and sure. This isn't stuff that we're going to kind of arm wrestle over. We're going to debate about. We're all solid on this. And, then he starts continuing in his language, and he talks about, right there towards the beginning of this section, he talks about the word seed. And in Genesis 22:18, so we're referring all the way back to the first book of the Bible, he's pulling up that quote there from Genesis, and it's saying, in your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Why? Because you have obeyed my voice. So while Paul's just talking about through the seed of Abraham, the promise was made, well, when we see about the promise and we see about the seed being referenced, what we see is everyone's going to be blessed, all the nations. We talked about that before. And why? Because you have obeyed my voice. No law, remember, no law. We're talking about by faith, Abraham is following what God says. And he's saying it's not just a genetic people. It's not a specific people grouping. Yes, God was working through a people. He was trying to do something unique. He was trying to set them apart. He was trying to show how this is the way the rest of the world is operating, but I'm doing something special in you and through you. Yes, that is a true historical thing. But he's saying as long as we're talking about promise now, as long as we're talking about covenant, I'm not talking about a genetic people, and that's why he uses the word seeds. Hey, there's this outpouring of people, the seeds of your loin that, he says that, your people will be just this vast nation. There's going to be a lot of them. And eventually, as we see through Isaac and Jacob, and we see the family of the 12 tribes grow, that there are a lot of them. But he's saying for this, what we're talking about here, this isn't about the genetic people, the seeds. He's pointing towards Jesus specifically, the seed, the one who is going to come. And his specific seed, the one that fulfills the promise of the covenant. So here we have, as he's pointing out, 430 years before the law even. And the law well precedes, by over 1,000 years, the time of Jesus. And so he's saying that, even before the law came Abraham, and in that promise that your seed is going to fulfill the promise of the covenant. So there is a seed. There is one coming that is going to fulfill that. And how are all the nations going to be blessed through the 12 tribes? Through this outpouring, because we do know that God was working through the tribes. He was working through Israel. There's no denying that was part of the plan of faith. But how are you going to go from this multitude of people, a great people that God was working through, how are you going to go from seeds to seed except through Jesus? Because Jesus has a lineage through the 12 tribes. He was of the tribe of Judah through his earthly parents. And so it's through that line that Jesus ends up coming and being that seed that is going to be part of the fulfillment of the promise, that is the fulfillment of the promise. And, again, Paul's pointing out that the law comes along 430 years after. And again, God is working through the people. He's trying to do something different with them. He's trying to show them some stuff. And in later sections, we're going to talk about how the law is important. The law's got a purpose. It's doing something for us. It really is demonstrating something to it. But again, you can't add to or replace any of this. The promise is a promise from God to us. It is God's promise. And even though the law is there, the law is significant. And again, we'll unpack that some too. But the law can't add or subtract or replace anything from the promise itself. The promise is the promise. That's God's covenant. That's the sealed deal. That's the whole thing. And if the law is the way, think about this. If the law is the way to get there, then that's not a promise. That's not a covenant. That's a contract. Think back through those legal addendums. You could have something as simple as a lease agreement that says, if you are in this property, you have to pay X amount of money every month by X time. If not, then. If there's damages, if this, then. And there's all these if-then statements that say, if you do this, then this. There are penalties. You have to make payments. There's even stipulations in the simplest of legal agreements that say, when violations occur, here's how I will pursue actual restitution. Here's how I will pursue punishment or repayment. This is even the venue in the court that I want it to appear in to benefit me. That's how contracts work. But a promise, a covenant, says, this is my offering to you, period. I don't have to worry about what happens when you don't do it or anything else. I'm handling this agreement, is what God is saying. This is my covenant. This is my promise to you. That if you receive in faith, then you shall be saved. The law, as we begin to look at it, it's really showing us a way to live. God is going to use the law to say, I want to show you a lot of different things that I want to show you how sin impacts us, how it hurts, that there's a penalty for it. He sets up laws about atonement and sacrifice to begin working into his people. He's going to be building a people. Like I said, he's creating a people that are sanctified, that are set aside for his purposes. And so the law is going to be doing that. And it has a purpose. It has a demonstration, but it is not the way to salvation. The covenant is the promise. And it is still held above the law. Because the law is showing a way of life. The law is showing us what transgression looks like. The law is showing us how we can be different. And it shows us certain kingdom values. And it shows us that there's a costliness to sin. But that covenant promise is still greater and higher than that. Because that is the ultimate word, the ultimate promise of God. And so Paul, looking at this argument, is probably looking at the fact that some of the Judaizers are probably trying to quote Moses at folks, probably trying to, say, hey, don't forget, circumcision is required here, and don't forget these legal requirements that are in the law. But Paul says, I'm going to a higher authority, because 430 years before the law was a promise that God spoke to our people. So he goes, I'm quoting to Abraham. And I'm quoting to the promise, not to the law. And he says, that is bigger, it is first, and it is better. So, yeah, you guys can bring the law, and you can try and hold people to the law. But we all know that while Moses is great and wonderful, that the great patriarch Abraham, he had the promise, he had the covenant. And just remember, it is bigger, it is better, and it was first. And that's where we need to be resting. That's the clarity he wants to bring. He wants to cut away these legal things that are starting to weigh people down, those unnecessary encumbrances that are hindering their faith, that are trying to add to their faith, but in truth actually subtract from it. And he is saying, what I'm trying to point you towards is better than that. So that brings us to the end of our section for today. Wrapping that one up, we'll dive into another section next time, and we'll catch you then. Take care.
This has been another episode of the Beyond Sunday podcast. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe.